and welcome to episode 22, which is obviously the fuck off to 2020. I am recording this on New Year's Eve, so it quite literally is the day to say fuck off to 2020, because it has been an absolutely abysmal year. I am going to be running through the standard process, as I said I was going to last week, and I'm going to be doing 4 departments from the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy department. They won't take too long this time because, well, you'll see. And then what I'm going to do is, rather than going into FOEFN, I'm going to give a bit of an update around some stuff that leads on from the episode that I did of Burden of Proof. And then I'm going to do my pitiful little predictions for the forthcoming year, most of which would probably be more aptly called, rather than predictions, just statements of the blindingly bleedin obvious, but never mind. If you do happen to hear any sort of bangs or anything like that in the background, there's somebody letting off some fireworks somewhere, so I'm sure they'll be arrested shortly. Well, it's been a reasonable start to the day for me anyway. Well, I mean, it's evening now, but in terms of having something that has finally gone right to some degree before the new year gets going, is I've actually made the shift to having a proper phone. One of the old phones. And before anybody says a dumb phone, it's not a dumb phone, it's a phone. Because I don't want, and I'm sick of, these bloody things, these smarty phone things. I'm not interested anymore and I don't want one. So I've made the shift. And it's a very good phone as well. It's a lovely thing. It's called the Hammerbow Plus. Finally managed to get it to work. Excellent, love it. So that has been a good start to the day for me. So anyway, without further ado, let's move into getting the process part out of the way first. If I can move on, yeah, right. So let's start off with this Regulatory Policy Committee. So the first problem I've got with this is that they hadn't reported for 2 years. So again, when you've got all of this nonsense around government saying we're going to be transparent and we're going to do this, that and the other and that, and everything's going to be done properly, apparently not in this one. So the key problem I've got with this, which means that we can make that 1.5 million saving, not a lot of money obviously, but the key part to it is that they basically give the game away. Well, I've written up the message to just, you can tell exactly what I think, that if you're supposed to be giving some policy advice, what is the point of then turning around and saying what we don't do is offer advice? Kind of makes it a little bit meaningless, really, isn't it? And it seems fairly obvious even that when you've got an organisation that is supposed to be set up to make sure that government policies are done on a evidence basis and analysis basis, when they quite clearly don't, then this is a redundant committee. Simple as that. So I mean, there's so much that we can see in that, whether it is to do with the Ponzi China virus, whether it's to do with climate change or anything else along those lines. Evidence and analysis, cost benefit, things of this nature, quite clearly doesn't take place. So that's these people. Redundant. We don't need them. Central Arbitration Committee. Right. Not an awful lot of money here again, but yet another saving. And the reason why it would be a saving is because this department, or this committee essentially, and that is determining the acceptance of unions and then being able to be the arbiter as it says, as you know, names on the tin, between employers and unions. The reason why I think this one would go, and here's where some people might have an argument against, but I would get rid of unions as well. And I would get rid of unions on a simple premise, really, is that they started off, God, how long ago? When you're going back a good 100 years or more, and that unions first got started. And it was started with all of the right, as per usual, all of the right intentions. It then swiftly developed into something that was akin to the mafioso. And these days it is yet another arm of the crony socialists. So I've got no interest in unions at all. Very much in the camp of Maggie Thatcher insofar as that sort of thing is concerned. And quite frankly, if we've got something in place where you're making sure that you have oversight with teeth, proper teeth, that can look after the regulatory side of business, then frankly you don't need a union anyway. So there would be measures put in place to be able to handle these kind of situations, and it would be more to do with then the actual employees themselves, rather than the employees having to hand over all their money to somebody who's just then gonna, well, I mean, after knowing people in the union and that, they basically spend the entire year looking towards their next piss up. So yeah, let's not have people like that. So they would be gone. So we're getting on quite quickly. Competition Appeal Tribunal. Right, all you need to do with this one is go back to episode 18, because at that particular point in time we did, as I've got up on the screen there, when I did the competition service, and it says separate website, Competition Appeal Tribunal, separate website, both ends up being the exact same website. So basically we've already dealt with this one. So that would be wiped off in terms of, because I can't remember, I think I probably did get rid of it on actually that, because we have other departments that do the exact same thing. So this to me is, again, if you remember all the way back to like episodes 2 or 3, something like that, where I turned around and said, well, let's get rid of the doubling up of departments so we can actually squeeze things down to what they actually have, rather than this twin representation to make government look bigger than it actually is. Essentially we can just get rid of this on the same premise. So that's a third one dealt with. If only we could get through this stuff in every department as quickly. Now, Copyright Tribunal. Zero transparency as far as this one is concerned. There's no annual reports, there's no costings, there's no staff levels. It's meaningless, and because of the fact that it is apparently quite so meaningless, and how little they seem to do. I mean, again, you've got this, we don't deal with cases involving copyright infringement, blah blah. I mean, it's literally, when you've got a department that has to put up a sign that says what we don't do, it generally means you don't do a lot. So as the line indicates, I would imagine the vast majority of this could be handled, and we'll probably come to it at the appropriate stage later on, can be handled under the courts and tribunal service anyway. So another one, not needed. So when we do go through the RASIC stage, the chances are, if you can find out whatever the amount of money is that is being spent on this waste of time, there's your saving. So, I mean, very, very quickly, we can go straight through and we can determine that at this stage, like I say, as you can see, there's all the work that I've done, and that is so far for the BEIS. All the different departments, all the different costs, all the number of employees, all of the data is in there. And for this department alone, so far, we're looking at getting on for 18 billion, which is good 7.5 billion over the stated budget. So once again, those questions should be asked as to why it is that they don't seem to be able to report the correct figures. So in terms of the developments and the cumulative taxpayer saving that we could associate with everything that's been discussed thus far, throughout the time that I've been doing this in 2020. So we can quite simply just add on to the abolish area the four committees that I've just, well, two committees, two tribunals that I've just discussed. So you'll see on the abolish part, you've got the RPC, CAC, CAT and CT. All would be removed. Investigated properly, of course, but still, nonetheless, wouldn't exist anymore because you don't need them. Where's my mouse gone? Right. So, what I want to move into this week is a bit of an update. Now, if you remember, I'd done a standalone video called The Burden of Proof. Subsequent to that, and because if you remember, and that's when I did the Committee on Climate Change, I said, gone, because there's no burden of proof there, and that it's a waste of time. In December, they have now published these 3 reports whereby an awful lot of the information that I've seen so far, and I'm probably going to have to do another episode and that to follow up on this one alone, but there's an awful lot of repetitive information within there. And this is going to be quite important because from what I've seen so far, there are policies that are a serious, serious problem for me. And by association for anybody else in the UK. Now I want to be very, very clear on one particular point here, and I've got 3 individuals up on the above me here, and I'm going to be clear on this, and that based on some stuff that has taken place today. Now, when you've got the Secretary of State, this is the guy that will either say yay or nay to what is being suggested within these reports. So responsibility number 1 goes to him. I've already sent out a Freedom of Information request to him as to whether this is going to be rejected. We'll see what happens with that. The 2 people below, the Professors Piers Forster and Corinne, and I'm going to struggle to pronounce this name, Lequier, I don't know how you pronounce that, and if she does happen to listen to this at any point, apologies if I've got that wrong. And now I will say specifically, before I go into the next slide, because I'm going to show a couple of examples as to why I've got a problem, but rather than me sitting back and throwing out insults, which would be a very easy thing to do, I'm going to give some credit to, I'll just call her Corinne for the time being, that because I don't know how you pronounce her surname, because I sent out messages to both Piers Forster and to Corinne, and I asked them the questions that I always ask, the 2 critical questions, scientific method and the 2 equations leading to the closure problem. Not heard anything from Piers yet. I did have a response from Corinne today, and I'm going to show you that in a little while. And the reason why I want to pinpoint that is because I'd only sent that email out yesterday and she's already responded. That means you've got somebody that is, I mean, time will tell, but at least has got the balls to actually make a response. And I'll come into why that becomes an important matter a little bit later on. So I will be putting the link in the description as to where you can find these 3 reports and look at them yourself, because I haven't finished going through them yet. So it's certainly something that needs to be looked at, and the reason why it needs to be looked at is because of a couple of examples that I've got here. So this shift towards positive long-term behaviours, and bear in mind again that this is supposed to be something to do with reducing your carbon footprint based on what they believe around climate change. What the hell does having a long-term facilitation of social distancing on public transport have to do with climate change? This is where ideology is quite clearly showing through, and this is where we're going to start to have some problems. Then we have tackling the wider resilience deficit. Now, they're suggesting there that there has to be evidence-led preparations. All the more important that they understand why I'm asking the questions for the burden of proof. But again, as you come down, that the COVID-19 will bring benefits to health, well-being and national security. So essentially what we are looking at here, and that is, as much as I've mentioned on a number of occasions, you've got the Agenda 21, 2030, and then you've got your Great Reset. There's an awful lot of this agenda-based ideology nonsense that is being fed through into this, because none of this has got anything to do with any kind of carbon footprint. This is garbage. So that will lead into, here's the response that Karine sent back to me and my subsequent response to her. So again, press pause and read it if you like. Now, obviously Karine has made mention, as this seems to be the bog standard response, oh, the IPCC has got extensive information, blah blah blah. That's not an answer. Like I said, I'll give her a due that not only has she responded quickly, but she's given a response that does indicate something to me. Obviously you'll see that I've pointed out that no, sorry, that isn't the response. There are no technical papers within the IPCC reports that provide the scientific method, nor do they solve the closure problem. And I've mentioned about, let's not call these, you need to be in touch with the government to say this is not settled science, this is not proven anything, and you don't know if you're actually solving anything. But the thing about it is, and this is kind of where it gets into the situation of let's have a think in the new year as to what it is that we're actually dealing with. So the way I'm breaking it down at the moment is to say, well, okay, so you've got the authors of an ideology. So you'll end up with your likes of your Adolf Schwabs. And as much as, I don't actually think he's an author either, and that I think he falls into the second category, which is the useful idiots. Now, a useful idiot is generally somebody who you can kind of associate by saying that it'll be the person that will take those 30 pieces of silver. But generally speaking, they're not going to want to be on the front line of anything. So the one thing that the authors and the useful idiots have in common is cowardice. Simple as that. That's why they can't handle anybody questioning anything, because they're cowards and they know that it doesn't stand up to scrutiny. What you end up with is the third layer, and this is a third layer where I'm going to make an assumption here, because the third level is I couldn't add all manner of words to this and that, but I'll just call them the unwitting for the time being. Now, the reason why I'm going to say that is because there's been people that within the scientific academic community and so forth, that, call them what you want, that have had a speciality in a particular area, and so their full focus is on that, and then they will feed into a wider conversation where they're not necessarily playing a part in that wider conversation. So the assumption on their part is that the wider conversation is being handled in as competent a manner as what they assume that they are doing. So, I have heard this from a number of different scientists and others as well, and that are sort of involved in the field, but not what you would literally call a scientist as per se, where they their response to any question is, well, that is handled by those specialists in that area. I will add my 2 pennyworth into it, but in terms of the overall assumption, that's handled by somebody else, and they assume that that's done correctly. The example I can use here is Judith Curry, who, again, a scientist, who she was one of the ones that studied the polar bears predominantly. And then I think it was a couple of years ago now, where she was suddenly ostracised from the academic community for daring to having said that actually there's no problem with the polar bears. I don't know what you're talking about. Why is everybody saying that the polar bears are in such, virtually going extinct, where I've been out there, I've looked at it, I've counted the numbers, and that they're absolutely fine. Well, that didn't go with the useful idiots and the authors' rhetoric, therefore must be put to one side. This obviously led to Judith Curry saying, well, hang on a minute. If you're not prepared to listen to this particular truth, what else is wrong? And so she started to delve a little bit deeper in wider areas and found that a great deal of what she had previously believed turned out not to be true, or at the very least turned out to be not as rigorous as the methodology demands that it should be. And so she started to ask more and more questions, and now she has a website that is dedicated to this kind of thing. The fact that this Corrine has responded in the way that she has does strike me as a similar kind of scenario, really, that she would actually have the good grace to make a response. But obviously, as I can respond to her, well, no, actually, where you think the answer is doesn't actually exist. It doesn't exist there. So we will see. Will she respond again, and will she look into things further? Will she be a little bit more open-minded about these things? Who knows? But it occurs to me that 2021 is the year where we all essentially have a bit of a duty to determine who are the unwitting, who are the useful idiots, and then I think we've got a reasonably well-established understanding of who the authors are. And then the reason why this is important is because when it comes down to the unwitting, they make up the vast majority of the people that are producing the papers or making the arguments or being the front face of cases that they will make that can then be distorted to mean something else by the useful idiots and the authors. This is particularly obvious within the IPCC because anybody that checks into the IPCC's methodology, they literally create the document for the was it like, I can't remember what the precise title was, like suggestions for policymakers, something like that. They literally create that document first, and then the working groups that are supposed to be putting the science together, it will then get put together to be able to fit the narrative that they've already created, the political statement for the policymakers. That's a long established fact, and that goes back, Christ, a number of years now. And that, I mean, it particularly came to the fore in when was it? 1997, I think it was. And I would imagine as well that when it comes down to Corrine, I mean, she surely to God must have the knowledge that because she's at the University of East Anglia, she should have the knowledge that the University of East Anglia has something of a reputation, because that's where ClimateGate comes from, which is 10 years ago now. The other guy, Piers Forster, he's with the University of Leeds. Now, the University of Leeds is quite the hotbed. I think essentially where the University of East Anglia has that reputation for ClimateGate, an awful lot of that ideology is now very much embedded in the University of Leeds. And the reason why you can establish that is because of the example being this citizens' assembly that they did, which was not a citizens' assembly, and it wasn't a proper discussion. It was literally just, here's our ideology, do you agree with it, yes or no? There's a guy called Ben, oh god, what's his surname? Can't remember his name now. Ben something or other. Anyway, he's going to be putting out a series of videos. When he puts out his next one, I'll put some links in. He's putting together a series of videos that exposes how poorly put together that one was, and how it's pushing conclusions through to the very committee that Karine sits on, pushing conclusions through to them that are actually based on total garbage. I mean, like, I think the first video that he did was based on how they'd made these suggestions about the changes to eating habits, when the percentages that were pushed forward to this particular committee were based on the results of literally just 10 people. So 60 million people have to be compliant with something that was based off of an answer of 10 people. I mean, it's just farcical. So, like I say, I mean, for the time being, when she's been good enough to make the response, it's not a horrible response by any means. Normally, when it comes down to being a bit horrible and a bit nasty and a bit rude, that's generally my sound. But yeah. But the thing of it is, when we're coming across things like these, the climate policies, when it comes to Ponzi China virus or whatever virus the WHO have now got planned for us, because apparently the big one is yet to come. What we need to be doing is understanding what are the questions, and who do you send those questions to? Because generally speaking, the one thing about all of this is that within all of these different committees, you get to find out who these people are. All you have to do is bother to look, and then look to find out how you actually get in contact with them and ask them the questions. And the more that people start asking these questions, the more chance there is that you're actually going to be getting through to either the unwitting or something that they've failed to take into consideration, or anything along those lines. And then you're going to start to see that the like I say, I mean, the unwitting, or even the ones that are just pure dogma, you're going to get to understand where you stand with these people, and you've got more chance of chipping away at it to say, well, hang on a minute. If you've been told this particular part of the equation, and then yours is based on taking that assumption, don't take that assumption, because here's a question that brings that into disrepute. So it's a matter of understanding what the questions are. So I think 2021 should be a case of people, I mean, there's lots of us out there that watch various different videos of the people that are asking various different, or pointing out various different anomalies and saying, well, why is this not taking place, and why is that not taking place? Be sure to understand that the questions that you're asking are valid questions, and where at all possible, try to find out if there is somebody that, if for example you did manage to get a response, do you actually understand the response that you're getting, or could you send that response through to somebody that you know would actually be able to translate that into English in a lot of occasions. because some of the stuff that you can get back, it literally does look like double Dutch. I know a prime example would be the an awful lot of talk lately around whether this Ponzi China virus has actually been isolated. Now, I have found a paper in North Korea that kind of suggests that it has. It's a bugger to read, but it is at least a paper that can be researched and found. But the other part to it is that there was I can't remember what the woman's name is in that, but there was a film that was doing the circuit called Plandemic, I think it was called, and the particular woman that was central to that video, she'd made various comments, particularly about the history of Fauci. Well, she'd also made some comments around the let's just say the makeup of this SARS-CoV-2 being 80% the same as previous, the SARS-CoV-1. Well, surely she wouldn't have known that unless she'd isolated it. So you have to be careful with how various pieces of information are presented. So, with that one, I've not looked in massive detail again. I've just done a bit of research in that because, like I said, I can't do it all. But you have to understand whether the questions that you're asking are actually legitimate questions. So, if you do see something if you want to concentrate on this China virus thing, have a look at the videos of Ivor Cummings, for example. Have a look at the Great Barrington Declaration, stuff like that, and try to pluck out the good questions. And then the two parts to it is finding out precisely who it is that you could be asking questions, or directing your questions to, but then also include your local politicians as well, and really start to do what should be the basis of any science as a prerequisite, where you're literally questioning things and so, okay, have you considered this, or how come you've come to this conclusion when the observable data is showing something different? Let's start passing these questions out. Let's not just make videos and moan about stuff. Let's ask the questions and see where the answers can take us. Because the more that you do that, the more chance that you're going to have of getting some semblance of common sense appearing amongst the people that are either unwitting or are just not necessarily a part of that particular, they're working on the basis of an assumption that has been performed by somebody else, because their speciality might be such that they're not really there to be concentrated on that particular element, but it's critical that assumption feeds into their work. So if you've asked them the question, they might turn around and say, well, okay, hang on a minute, and then they'll have a look at what the assumption was, put the question through to that one, and then they might find some different determinations, and the advice might start to come out, and we might start to see the breakthrough of advice being presented both to the public and to politicians and so on and so forth in a much more open, transparent and frankly educated manner, because at the end of the day, all of these things, it comes down to whether something is true or not. And if all of the information that is coming out, whether it be through mainstream media, whether it be through organisations like the IPCC, the UN, WHO, World Economic Forum, blah blah blah, if they become the only source that people like Karine or anybody else that is actually working within these fields, if those are the only people that are providing the rhetoric, and providing the information, then of course they're going to be working from a limited base. So it's incumbent on us to find the right questions to determine whether something has been considered fully or not, what the evidence and what the analysis should be, and start asking, start getting the people that make up that larger part of, even then, what is essentially a minority, because it's also that thing that people need to always remember. It's not about majority rule or anything like that. I mean, it's literally just boiling things down to what's right. So if you've got an author at the top that is coming up with all manner of bullshit to be able to push an ideology, you're talking about a very, very tiny amount of people. Then, like I say, you'll have your ones that are taking the 30 pieces of silver. It's still a very small group of people. Then you add in the unwitting. It becomes that bit bigger, but still, relative to the wider public, it's a small amount of people. So if you start to chip away at those layers, then a few voices, it literally becomes a case of the vast majority just being able to go, why are we listening to you? We've all just established that what you're saying is wrong, so we're not going to listen to you anymore. It's as simple as that. The only way that an ideology or a any kind of I don't know, any kind of sort of harmful intent, put it that way. I mean, particularly over where an awful lot of this boils down to, and that, and it doesn't matter which angle you go through, and that it all ends up, and not an awful lot of it just ends up having some kind of eugenics tilt to it. If everybody just sort of gathers that understanding, I mean, you'll never get it from the sheep. I mean, the sheep will just always just sit there and go, bah, it doesn't matter what you do. But if the people that have got the inclination to turn around and say, well, no, this doesn't make sense, I'm not prepared to go along with all of these ridiculous measures that you're now trying to impose on us. And as I've pointed out to Karine in my response, where you're literally starting to infringe on human rights, and I'm not talking about silly human rights, I'm talking about actual proper human rights. Like I said, with that stuff over long-term social distancing on public transport, what the hell does that have to do with these people? That's an infringement on human rights. There's a further piece, a little bit further into the document. I think it's on page 112, where they've said that buildings that do not meet the EPC C standard will not allowed to be sold. So essentially that means within the UK, any house built before 1920, something like that, around about that sort of time frame. I mean, this particular house, and that was built in 1900. So this house would fall into a serious problem. So the property that I have, they're going to turn around and tell me, no, you can't sell it, you can't do what you want with my own property. That's an infringement on my human right to own property. And when I own property, that does by default mean that because it's mine, I have the determining factor on whether I buy or sell this home. That's down to me. It's not down to some diktat from some know nothing. And that there are things like that included in that policy document. So we need to be, like I say, understanding the bigger picture, making sure that we're asking the right questions, and letting these people know, do you actually understand what it is that you've just put in these reports? Do you actually understand what you've just signed off on? And that you've put forward with your name on it? It's a method of what we can actually do that's positive in 2021. Because the one thing that should always be the basis of anything is do these people really know what the hell they're talking about and what it is that they're doing and what the implications of what they're doing are going to be? It is good. I think it is going to be a hard 2021, but if we don't just sit on our asses and moan about it and then make a video going, it's not fair, you know, do something. There are things that you can do. I think there might have been elements of that was a little bit incomprehensible, where I've lost my train of thought. Doesn't matter, you get the picture, right? So, I'm going to finish this one off with 2021, what will happen? Like I say, by and large, the statements are the blindingly bleedin obvious. So, the first one in the US, I suppose that prediction is going to have to realistically wait until after January the 6th, where we've had the latest bombardment of information to say, well, oh, this is going to happen and that's going to happen and oh, the Insurrection Act and blah, 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 blah. Is it? Well, we'll see, because we've had several dates where they've said something is going to happen where it really hasn't. The thing about that one really is that I can just say, I hope so. I hope something does happen. There have been some very strange goings on over the last 3-4 weeks, which I'm not really going to go into, because it'll end up being another one of these a QAnon style bloody video, which I'm not going to do because QAnon has proven to be full of shit. But I think there's going to be something that will take place in the US, irrespective, that is going to have some effects on the rest of the Western world, essentially, because whether it be down to Trump staying in office, whether it be down to a kind of like a separation, or some kind of investigation that just can't be stopped. I think there's going to be something that will take place in the US over the next year anyway. So the second one, I really think that the Conservatives are, because we are looking towards this further lockdown going into as far as April, May, and like I say, possibly beyond, when you've got idiotic policies being created by that sixth carbon budget. I think the Conservatives, if that election goes ahead in May, they are going to get really hit hard, because things are really going to start to sink in with people. And there will be a few other things that, as I'm going through this, that will play into that particular result that I think will happen. So, the third one, obviously, already alluded to it, get ready for the long haul and the long fight, because this isn't going away anytime soon. All the more reason why we need to start understanding what those questions are, who those questions need to go to. I do think from number 4 that this will be expedited if we do start to ask these questions, but at some point there are going to be some numbers that start to come out. There is going to be some exposure around the numbers of people that have died, what they've actually died from, what have been the implications to things like the lack of healthcare and the denial of healthcare, and more specifically to do with the care homes and how people died in the care homes, because there's already been a number of stories told about how they've been, and I think I've mentioned it on here before, and that where in the UK, for example, that they were put on something called the Liverpool programme, which is basically nil by mouth and just leaving them to die, locking them in a room and leaving them to die. There's going to be some information, there's going to be some whistleblowing, there's going to be some serious information released that the mainstream media are just not going to be able to hold back. they're not going to be able to stop people from knowing. I think that type of thing is going to happen this year. In the meantime, moving into prediction number 5, essentially the WHO and that have given the game away. I mean, Bill Gates gave the game away. It's going to be virus 2.0, which we're pretty much already in anyway, and virus 3.0 and virus 4.0 and blah 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 blah. They're gonna double down and triple down. They're gonna try to keep this bullshit going as long as they possibly can. And like I say, it's going to be down to people asking the right questions, being prepared to essentially do that level of what is realistically a fight, and being able to gather the information, because it increases the potential for that critical piece of information that is finally going to open up people's eyes. It's all going to be based on this sort of stuff. So that's another part of the prediction for the year. Right, the Hail Mary. Again, whether it's going to be related to the virus or whether there's going to be something else, but something is going to happen within the year, and that is going to be a considerable shock. I do think there is a strong potential that one of those stories that comes out could be towards the implications of the vaccines that are not vaccines. Look that one up if you don't understand, but the ones that are the stuff that's doing the rounds at the moment, I'm talking technically now. This isn't just me turning around and saying, oh no, it's a poison and all that sort of stuff. Now, technically speaking, these are not vaccines. They're not injecting people with a small dose of the virus in order to be able to stimulate the immunity system. That's not what these are based on, so therefore technically it's not called a vaccine. So anyway, I think something along those lines is going to potentially take place, where some of the implications of that are going to be something that again can't be hidden. Or like I said, when it comes down to the violence against a citizen, massive gross overstepping of the mark by police, for example. Something along these lines I think is going to have to take place. And it'll be something like that then, whereas the people that have the ability to question and look at things in a, do some critical thinking on things, where they can turn around and say, well, okay, well, that doesn't look quite right, that doesn't look quite right. Those people that question will not be surprised when any of these sorts of things start to take place. It'll be the sheeple. It'll be something that wakes up the sheeple as well, to say, what the hell is that? I think there will be some sort of a big event take place. As a result of a number of these different things, I do think the pseudoscience element of what we keep being fed is going to become more widely known. So by the end of the year, essentially, again, this does kind of feed back into the reason why we do need to be getting those right questions, and do have these conversations, ask these questions and that to the scientists, because it will be I know that's within academia and so forth. I mean, an awful lot of those people that are in the wider scheme of things, and that just absolutely ridiculous, that they don't seem to understand some real basics that should just be part of common sense. But if you have these people that are just so specialised in a particular area, there's nothing wrong with that per se. So we don't want people to be losing specialties because they're no longer trusted because of somebody else having spewed out propaganda that then leads to the distrust of everything. That's the part that we've got to be careful of. And it literally is just a matter of saying, right, what is actually the truth of these things. When you're dealing with a scientist that has to work on the basis of assumption from somewhere else, get them to actually understand that you might need to question that a little bit and that to make sure it's right. So if we can start to see and hopefully we will start to see during this year, and that the exposure of the pseudoscience elements to what's being put out there, I think that's going to be a positive that comes out of 2021. Yeah, we'll see, but I mean, I think it's already the case anyway, that more and more people around the world and that are starting to scratch their head a bit as to what the hell is going on. I have put the side note in terms of China, because I'm not 100% on this one and that, but I've got a funny feeling that during this year and that there is going to be one of two things. Either China will actually perform an aggressive act somewhere. Now, this is the two potentials for this are either Taiwan or India, because there are indications towards both. I mean, they've already made some incursions into India already, so something like that is going to take place, where we have to be very, very careful again, and that in terms of it being a genuine action that we can not necessarily see with your own eyes as such, but there's enough evidence there and that to suggest that it's real. Because that's why I put the caution in there, is be very, very careful of yet another false flag, one of these false flag events where, I mean, throughout the ages, there's, well, when I say throughout the ages, I mean particularly over the last 100 years, there's always had to be a bad guy somewhere. You've always had to, you got to find the bogeyman. I mean, by and large, they've switched tack to turn around and say, well, CO2 is the bogeyman, and this virus is the bogeyman. But inevitably, somewhere in that, they will always turn around and say some particular country is the bogeyman. Now, I do, and most people should have clear concerns around a lot of the stuff that China does, but I still want to make sure that we've got that reservation to understand that quite often things that result in, particularly things that result in some kind of military offensive, more often than not it's based on a false flag event. So we've got to be very, very certain as to what it is that we get outraged about. So these are a few things that I think that will take place. Like I say, I think most of it is blindingly bleeding obvious, but I figured, fuck it, just throw out that little bit of something alternative to me doing me faux effing part. And who knows, at some point during the year I might pop up occasionally and say, told you so. Or we'll get to the end of next year and that, and I'll be sat here wearing me hazmat suit and you won't be able to understand a word I say, and so it won't really matter anyway. And going, oh my god, we're all dying, and that from the Ponzi China virus version 5 or whatever the hell it's going to be. Who knows? It's worth a stab. Mine a little bit of entertainment anyway. So I think that will pretty much do the deed for this final episode of the year. And so I suppose I should just say cheers, and let's hope we get to the back end of 2021 with a little bit more of a cheer than we've gladly seen the back of this one. because generally speaking, it doesn't really matter. I mean, everybody has their off days, and I mean, there are days where I'm sitting here absolutely fuming. But at the end of the day, in that, I mean, there's no point just getting so down about these things and getting so embroiled in it to the point that you feel helpless about anything. There are always things that can be done. So I mean, there's nothing worse than the people that sit there and just moan and moan and moan and moan and have no solution to anything whatsoever. That part of things gets really quite boring. So hopefully I present at least a modicum of solution, providing you can actually understand what the hell it is that I'm saying. And it might not be, the killer solution of all solutions, but it's a little bit of something, There are other people that you can look to, that you can get in touch with, that you can try to have some level of conversation with. I know it can be difficult sometimes. So, for example, in one of the last videos I saw of Ivor Cummings, he was there with 3 other guys talking about vitamin D and how that would have solved an awful lot of the problems over this past year. And one of them turned around and said to Ivor, "Can you come over to appear in Parliament and tell them where they're getting things wrong?" To which he quite rightly pointed out, he said, "Well, I'm busy," because everybody was after him and has been because of the level of information that he's been putting out. He's become quite a popular little boy. But he said, "Well, why would anybody in Parliament want to listen to an Irishman coming over?" Because obviously then he must be from the Republic of Ireland. But some of these people that have got the more established voice, shall we say, they tend to be a little bit more difficult to be able to have these kinds of conversations with. But if you're finding the right kind of circles on social media, it doesn't have to be some big popular name. It can be just somebody that is providing a certain amount of information online or within your social media circles that is at least asking the questions, and then you can sort of have the backwards and forwards to go, well, okay, if this paper is saying this, I've got a paper that says that. Let's look at the two and compare them, and that. What is the actual question that we then need to ask to this particular individual, that particular individual? You can plan these things out. This is why when I'm putting up this stuff recently, like over when I did the people from Sage, and when I've done today about these 3 individuals, I mean, there's more individuals that are involved in that particular document, but I wanted to highlight those 3 because they're A, the person of greatest responsibility, and B, because the other 2 are the only ones that have got some level of involvement with the IPCC. The other people, irrelevant. And again, as per usual, as we're finding these days, it does also have a member of the committee that is a behavioural scientist, which is something that they need to be paying attention to, because they seem to be cropping up all over the place now, to the extent where it's less behavioural scientist, more propagandist. So, point being, there are always solutions. You might need to take that little bit of time and that to understand things. Even if you don't fully understand everything, it doesn't really matter. I mean, a bit of education never did you any harm, did it? At least you're learning to have that critical thinking. And what I tend to find is that more often than not, some people that are newly asking questions and looking at the various elements of their own background, they'll provide something new as well. They'll provide a new perspective that makes you think, okay, I hadn't taken that into account. Everybody's always got something that they can put into this. So it's also, so basically, again, this is one of these parts where I would say that don't ever think that what you can add to the equation is not really worthwhile. Unless you're a lefty, of course. Well, yeah, goes with, stands to reason, doesn't it? Right, you know, if you're an SJW or something like that, it stands to reason you're going to be talking bollocks. So yeah. So anyway, I've gone on to another little ramble to finish off with. So I'll call this one put this one to bed. Get this year's done, and then I'll keep plodding on with the new year. Keep providing new information on all the different departments, and I'll bring back FOFN as well. So, cheers once again, and have a good new year, as best you can. All right. Okay. Cheers. Take care now. Bye bye.